Welcome back. So we're still in the incidences of the life of an enslaved girl, Harriet Jacobs' story. So I'll just start reading again and again. I traversed those dreary 12 miles to and from town, and all the way I was meditating upon some means of escape for myself and my children. My friends had made every effort that ingenuity could devise to effect our purchase, but all their plans had proved abortive. Dr. Flint was suspicious and determined not to loosen his grasp upon us. I could have made my escape alone, but it was for my helpless children than for myself that I longed for freedom. Though the boon would have been precious to me above all price, I would not have taken it at any expense of leaving them in slavery. Every trial I endured, every sacrifice I made for their sake drew them closer to my heart and gave me fresh courage to beat back the dark waves that rolled and rolled over me in seamless, endless night of storms. The 6 weeks were nearly completed when Mr. Flynn's bride was expected to take possession of her new home. The arrangements were all completed, and Mr. Flynn said I had done well. He expected to leave home on Saturday and return with his bride the following Wednesday. After receiving various orders from him, I ventured to ask permission to spend Sunday night in town. It was granted, for which favor I was thankful. It was the first time I've ever asked him for anything, and I intended it should be the last. I needed more than one night to accomplish the project I had in view, but the whole of Sunday would give me an opportunity. I spent the Sabbath with my grandmother. A calm, more beautiful day never came down out of heaven. To me, it was a day of conflicting emotions. Perhaps it was the last day I should ever spend under the dear old sheltering roof. Perhaps these were the last talks I should ever have with the faithful old friend of my whole life. Perhaps it was the last time I and my children should be together. Well, better so, I thought, than they should be slaves. I knew the doom that awaited my fair baby in slavery, and I determined to save her from it or perish in the attempt. So I guess her daughter was a lighter-skinned kid than a younger kid. I went to make this vow at the graves of my poor parents in the burying ground of the slaves. Quote, there the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. There the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. The servant is free from his master. In death, right? Only in death. I knelt by the graves of my parents and thanked God, as I had done before, that they had not lived to witness my trial or to mourn over my sins. I had received my mother's blessing when she died, and in many an hour of tribulation I had seemed to hear her voice, sometimes chiding me, sometimes whispering loving words into my wounded heart. I've shed many a bitter tears to think that when I am gone from my children, they cannot remember me with such entire satisfaction as I remembered my mother. So yeah, this is a painful spot right here. And Harriet blaming herself, being sinful because she's not following the respectability politics. Like, you're enslaved, you just have to live. The graveyard was in the woods and twilight was coming on. Nothing broke the death-like stillness except the occasional twitter of a bird. My spirit was overawed by the solemnity of the scene. For more than 10 years I had frequented this spot, but never had it seemed to me so sacred as now. A black stump at the head of my mother's grave was all that remained of a tree my father had planted. His grave was marked by a small wooden board bearing his name, the letters of which were nearly obliterated. I knelt down and I kissed them. I poured forth a prayer to God for guidance and support in the perilous step I was about to take. As I passed the wreck of the old meeting house where, before Nat Turner's time, the slaves had been allowed to meet for worship, I seemed to hear my father's voice come from it, bidding me not to tarry till I had reached freedom or the grave. I rushed on with renovated hopes. My trust in God had been strengthened by that prayer among the graves. So for me, it's kind of reminiscent of Jesus praying before the crucifixion, but it could be right. My plan was to conceal myself at the house of a friend and remain there a few weeks till the search was over. My hope was that the doctor would get discouraged and for fear of losing my value and also of subsequently finding my children among the missing, he would consent to sell us, and I knew somebody would buy us. I had done all in my power to make my children comfortable during the time I expected to be separated from them. I was packing my things when grandmother came into the room and asked what I was doing. I'm putting my things in order, I replied. I tried to look and speak cheerfully, but her watchful eyes detected something beneath the surface. She drew me toward her and asked me to sit down. She looked earnestly at me and said, Linda, do you want to kill your old grandmother? Do you mean to leave your little helpless children? I'm old now and cannot do for your babies as I once did for you. I replied that if I went away, perhaps their father would be able to secure their freedom. Ah, my child, she said, don't trust too much to him. Stand by your own children and suffer with them till death. Nobody respects a mother who forsakes her children. And if you leave them, you will never have a happy moment. If you go, you'll make me miserable the short time I have to live. You would be taken and brought back, and your suffering would be dreadful. Remember poor Benjamin? Do give it up, Linda. Try to bear a little longer. Things may turn out better than we expect. So you see here how people remained in enslavement, not because they loved it, but because what were the options? My courage failed me in view of the sorrow I should bring on that faithful, loving old heart. I promised that I would try longer and that I would take nothing out of her house without her knowledge. Whenever the children climbed on my knee or laid their heads on my lap, she would say, poor little souls, what would you do without a mother? She don't love you as I do. And she would hug them to her own bosom as if to reproach me for my want of affection. But she knew all the while that I loved them better than my life. I slept with her that night, and it was the last time. The memory of it haunted me for many a years. On Monday, I returned to the plantation and busied myself with the preparations for the important day. Wednesday came. It was a beautiful day, and the faces of the enslaved were as bright as the sunshine. The poor creatures were merry. They were expecting little presents from the bride and hoping for better times under her administration. I had no such hopes for them. I knew that the young wives of slaveholders often thought their authority and importance would be best established and maintained by cruelty. And what I heard of young Mrs. Flint gave me no reason to expect that her rule over them would be less severe than that of the master and overseer. Truly, the colored race are the most cheerful and forgiving people on the face of the earth. That their masters sleep in safety is owing to their superabundance of heart, and yet they look upon their sufferings with less pity than they would bestow on those of a horse or a dog. And also you have to remember that fawning is a survival technique that has worked for as long as humanity lives. So sometimes being pleasant and forgiving when the odds are against you is them surviving. I stood at the door with others to receive the bridegroom and bride. She was a handsome, delicate-looking girl, and her face flushed with emotion at the sight of her new home. I thought it was likely that visions of a happy future were rising before her. It made me sad, for I knew how soon clouds would come over her sunshine. She examined every part of the house and told me that she was delighted with the arrangements I had made. I was afraid old Mrs. Flint had tried to prejudice her against me, and I did my best to please her. All passed off smoothly for me until dinner time arrived. I did not mind the embarrassment of waiting on a dinner party for the first time in my life half so much as I did the meeting with Dr. Flint and his wife, who would be among the guests. It was a mystery to me why Mrs. Flint had not made her appearance at the plantation during all the time I was putting the house in order. I had not met her face to face for 5 years, and I had no wish to see her now. She was a praying woman and doubtless considered my present position a special answer to her prayers. The devil must be answering those prayers. Nothing could please her better than to see me humbled and trampled upon. I was just where she would have me, in the power of a hard, unprincipled master. She did not speak to me when she took her seat at the table, but her satisfied, triumphant smile when I handed her her plate were more eloquent than words. The old doctor was not so quiet in his demonstrations. He ordered me here and there and spoke with peculiar emphasis when he said, "Your mistress." I was drilled like a disgraced soldier. When all was over and the last key turned, I sought my pillow and thankful that God had appointed a season of rest for the weary. The next day my new mistress began her housekeeping. I was not exactly appointed maid of all work, but I was to do whatever I was told. Monday evening came, and it was always a busy time. On that night, the slaves received their weekly allowance of food. 3 pounds of meat, a peck of corn, and perhaps a dozen herring were allowed each man. Women receive 1.5 pounds of meat, less, a peck of corn, and the same number of herring. Children over 12 had half the allowance of the women. Growing children, teens, the meat was cut and weighed by the foreman of the field hands and piled upon planks before the meat house. Then the second foreman went behind the building, and when the first foreman called out, "Who takes the piece of meat?" he answered by calling somebody's name. The method was resorted to as a means of preventing partiality in distributing the meat. The young mistress came out to see how things were done on her plantation, and she soon gave a specimen of her character. Among those in waiting for their allowance was a very old slave who had faithfully served the Flint family through 3 generations. When he hobbled up to get his bit of meat, the mistress said he was too old to have any allowance, that when the N-words were too old to work, they ought to be fed on grass. Shagud, poor old man, he suffered much before he found rest in the grave. My mistress and I got along very well together. At the end of the week, old Mrs. Flint made us another visit and was closeted a long time with her daughter-in-law. I had a suspicion what was the subject of the conference. The old doctor's wife had been informed that I could leave the plantation on one condition, and she was very desirous to keep me there. If she had trusted me as I deserved to be trusted by her, she would have had no fear of me accepting that condition. When she entered her carriage to return home, she said to young Mrs. Flint, "Don't neglect to send for them as quick as possible." My heart was on watch all the time, and I at once concluded that she spoke of my children. The doctor came the next day, and as I entered the room to spread the tea table, I heard him say, "Don't wait any longer, send for them tomorrow." I saw through the plan. They thought my children being there would fetter me to the spot, and it was a good place to break us all into abject submission to our lots as slaves. After the doctor left, a gentleman called who had always manifested friendly feelings towards my grandmother and her family. Mr. Flint carried him over to the plantation to show him the results of the labor performed by men and women who were unpaid, miserably clothed, and half famished. The cotton crop was all they thought of. I was duly admired, and the gentleman returned with specimens to show his friends. It was duly admired, and the gentleman returned with specimens to show his friends. I was ordered to carry water to wash his hands, and as I did so, he said, "Linda, how do you like your new home?" I told him I liked it as well as I expected. He replied, "They don't think you're contented, and tomorrow they are going to bring your children to be with you. I'm sorry for you, Linda. I hope they will treat you kindly." I hurried from the room, unable to thank him. My suspicions were correct. My children were to be brought to the plantation to be broken in. To this day, I feel grateful to the gentleman who gave me this timely information. It nerved me to immediate action. So it's going. Linda has to do something right now, but this is where we're going to leave Linda for a while. Thanks for listening.